don't know if it's doing voice, but I guess we'll see. It's my code right here. It's going to be tested against regular input, which was six digits. Six here. This one, we are receiving two list objects comprised of integers, comparing the elements within each one for one, first element compared in one first element in one list to the first element in the other list, and seeing which one is greater. The one that is greater after the comparison receives a point. If they're equal, no one receives a point. And at the end, we take the total sum of each individual and determine who is which is the list with the most points. So let's try it. So I already put some information there we go too. Or to put some information in, I just wanted to keep it in. So we have two list objects we are comparing. So for this, I thinking of using conditionals. It could be for loop, could be an if else conditional statement. So I'm going to take some time to think about this and then come back to it. Okay, took me a little bit of time to figure this one out, but to go over the objective again, it was to take in to a method two array lists of matching elements, different values, compare the first element of each one, compare each X element of each array list to see which one is of a higher value, and then depending whichever one was higher in another array list, insert a value of 1 into the respective element. So since we're comparing two, they're going to be two elements within this total array list, the result array list. So if the first array list had the higher number, then within the first element of this results array list, a 1 would go in the first element. And then if the second one had a higher one, then it would go into the second element in that array list. So what I address this by using or creating another array list. This one, I'm initializing it with two elements, two elements, both with value of 0. Then within the compare triplets method, I'm comparing the values of each list. And since they're both going to be the same size, I didn't factor in for any errors there or any discrepancies. I just have decided that the first array list was going to be the limit of which we're going to be incrementing our for loop, because we have the initializer, the condition, meaning the value of x is less than the size of a up until the last element, and the incremental operator. From there, I did the comparison with an if statement, conditional. So when we retrieve and compare the value of the first element, or x, it's greater than the value if the element and the x, if the x element is greater than, if the x element within the array list referenced by a is greater than the value of b, then that array list with the results is going to put in a value of 1 or increment by 1 in that first element. And in the inverse, if b, with the value of, if the x element within the array list referenced by b is higher than the x element, value of the x element in the array list referenced by a, then that second element in the results array list will be incremented by 1. Sounds kind of crazy, but essentially if whichever one is higher, you can probably see in this one to compare it. Comparing 1 and 3, 3 is higher, and this is the second one, so the second value, the second element is going to go up by 1. Those are equal, so nothing is done there. This one, the x element in A has the higher value, so that incrementation is going to go into the first element of the results array. So let's see if we can run this. Let's see what our results are, and we see that it works for 5, 6, 7. So in this case, comparing these two, first one's going to go up by 1. Those two are equal. This one is higher, so that one's going to go up by 1. That's why we see 1 and 1. So in the second test case, we see a comparison of 1799. This one is higher, so it means that value is going to go up in the second element. Comparing the second elements of both arrays, 28 to 16, 28 is higher, so that number is going to be incremented in the first element of the output. Comparing the last elements, 30 and 8, the array list referenced by A has the higher value in the X element, so that is going to go up by 1, and that's why we see 2 and 1. Let's see if we can test this with some custom input. So it's 6, 1, 2, B is not the value, 8, 2, 3, 0, 22, and 4. So in this case, we should be seeing this one's higher, that's equal, that one's higher. You should be seeing 3, 0 in this one. So let's test it out. And we see 3, 0. So that will do it. The objective for this coding assignment is to take in a list, an array list, I believe, of integers and return the sum of all of them. Now, within this, I apologize, it's just an array, not an array list. The limits of this one, or the factors of this one, is that it may contain very large integers. So instead of using the standard integer variable or int variable, we will be using a long, which can take a much much larger value of variables. So let's give it a shot. Okay, I may have overthought this one. All I really needed to do was create a public static long variable, which I did. You have to leave it with a trailing L to indicate that it's a long variable. Also, it'll automatically convert it to an integer, and we'll get this error that says cannot convert from int to long. And within this method of every big sum, I used a for loop with an enhanced for loop where for every long variable inside of this list that is being referenced in the method, we add that value into the variable called total. And we're using this format where we're saying total is equal to total plus I. Another way to write this would be total equals total plus I. But we have the option of doing it this way. And from there, once we get the total, we just return it by casting it as a long. And I've tried this out with the standard input. I've also tried it with some custom input, but let's try it again with the used input. And it works. So we try it again with some custom input. Say if we want to use 4 variables. And let's try it now. And it adds up correctly with all these variables that are quite large.